Welcome to FinTech Confidential, bringing you the people, tech, and companies that change how you pay and get paid. 98% of B2B payments are still done manually. $70 trillion B2B payments market. Major rideshare companies employing 50-plus person accounts receivable teams. It's seen as the most unglamorous, most boring corner of fintech.
Honestly, I was just sat on the sofa one day and the whole thing just came to me like that. If you don't embrace the chaos, you're not going to be able to handle it. The thing with problems like this is they just draw you straight back in.
AI agents don't just automate payments, they negotiate, communicate, and resolve disputes just like humans. It's possible that we end up in a fully autonomous AI negotiation.
Why, for thousands of years, people have done it the same way. We found out it was natively multilingual.
I'm human. I make mistakes.
We all are. We all make mistakes. Think about how the human would do, and then imagine how you could make it superhuman. Focus on solving the customer's problem as best as you can, and let everything else take care of itself.
Hey, Ted Huff here. Ever thought about how you could streamline your application and underwriting process? Well, let me introduce you to Under. Why keep using the outdated methods of PDFs when you can digitize them effortlessly? All you gotta do is upload the PDF, send it out for digital signature, and voila, you're set for the digital age. Are you curious on how to make that happen? Head over to under.io/FTC and get started for free. It's really that simple. Welcome to FinTech Confidential Series Leaders One-on-One, where we sit down with FinTech leaders to learn about what drives their passion for FinTech, for their business, and their leadership lessons. I'm your host, Ted Huff, and today's guest is Duncan Barrigan, founder and CEO at Lunos.ai. Duncan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ted. Great to see you.
If you don't know who Duncan is, no big deal. But Duncan, he left a $2.2 billion unicorn to solve what he calls the most boring problem in business, but one that is worth over $70 trillion annually. After scaling GoCardless to processing over $100 million in annual recurring revenue, Duncan discovered a shocking reality. 98% of B2B payments are still done manually, with companies like major rideshare companies employing 50-plus person accounts receivable teams. His hammer and nail awakening led to founding Lunos AI in 2024, where AI agents don't just automate payments, they negotiate, communicate, and resolve disputes just like humans, but never get tired, never forget, and they actually scale infinitely. Just a few weeks ago, I had this invoice nightmare dispute that really proves the point that Duncan has made in my conversations with him. This client missed paying one invoice, and it seemed pretty simple. But then I sent the follow-up email saying, hey, did you accidentally forget to pay this? He fired back with an email and says, yes, I have paid this, and then rattled off a whole bunch of conflicting details, and we were going crazy with this one. And then, of course, I had to make it worse because I did an export out of the accounting system and sent it to him, which had all the wrong data in it too. And this forced me to download 3 months of bank statements, cross-reference every invoice I'd ever sent, compare that to what was marked as paid in the accounting system, and spend an hour and a half on the call with the client, walking them through line by line, all because they questioned whether I even knew what the heck I was doing. I'm a payments professional, and they were questioning that. That's exactly the communication chaos costing businesses millions and millions in operational overhead. And that's exactly what Duncan realized. It isn't a workflow problem. It's really a communication crisis. So, Duncan, what do you think of the chaos I created?
It's a fabulous example. I should say you're not alone. The stories I hear are crazy, but yours it's a pretty good one.
So for our audience, you were the chief growth officer at GoCardless. At the time, it was valued at $2.2 billion and over $100 million ARR. Most people, heck, I would have even killed for that position. But you decided to walk away and tackle accounts receivable. Literally, as you said, it's seen as the most unglamorous, most boring corner of fintech. From the outside, it sounds like career suicide. But how did you discover that $70 trillion B2B payments market and decided to change everything?
For me, it was a bit of a hammer and nail moment. I had spent all that time, so I was chief product officer as well, and had spent so much time thinking about how to help businesses get paid. But when you hold a hammer that is pulling money from people's bank account, you tend to think that the answer is always, in fact, to pull money from people's bank account. And then when I put my hammer down, I suddenly started thinking a bit less biased about the problem. That's when Lunos came to me.
Every entrepreneur and every founder has that light bulb moment when you realize you had to do this. What was that specific moment that you realized it'd been done fundamentally wrong? When did you put down the hammer, as you said?
I first left GoCardless and took some time off to figure out what to do. I'd always wanted to do something, and I thought, if I keep riding this rocket ship, I'm never going to do it. So I sort of forced myself to leave and figure it out. I spent a while trying to do something completely different. The thing with problems like this is they just draw you straight back in. Honestly, I was just on the sofa one day and the whole thing came to me like that. In my head, I was like, that's what I'm going to do.
How did walking away from being the chief growth officer at a $2.2 billion unicorn, how did you get the mental clarity to see what other payments companies and other AR companies were missing?
Stepping away and reflecting. I'd always wanted to start something. I'm a person that does things very full throttle, and therefore I think it's quite hard to have those moments of reflection when I'm going as hard as I can. Taking that time out to think about it allowed me to connect the dots in my head and say, hold on, I've been going about this wrong all along. It was kind of a Matrix moment where it just came together in my head. From that point, it's been very clear ever since that I'd been looking at the problem wrong. I had been looking for answers that I wanted rather than really trying to understand as deeply as possible what was going on and why are these 50 plus person AR teams. I hadn't really stopped to ask that.
This is a very important topic to me personally, because not only do I run multiple companies, but in my career, I've built custom AR AP solutions for both complex B2B as well as B2C, as well as B2B2C. They have 60 plus person reconciliation teams. And some of the software that we've had to build was like one piece of software for incoming payment reconciliation, then another piece for outgoing payment reconciliation, and a third system to do paper check payments, and then electronic payments, and then manage collecting or receiving funds. We're talking about payment dependencies where you can't pay an invoice until you receive invoice B, but then the amount gets applied depends on what is paid and whether it was net 7, net 15, net 30, net 60, net 90. And then, of course, you've got all these fun things where rebates start to sit on top of everything and adjust all these fun things. It really feels like every off-the-shelf workflow solution seems to break the moment this kind of complexity hits. You've seemed to figure out how to solve for the most unpredictable factor in all of this, human chaos of a disputed payment or a negotiation. That sounds impossible until you see it work. Can you tell me about that first beta customer that completely broke all of your assumptions?
Our approach from the beginning, when the core realization I had was, well, that humans have been handling B2B payments for essentially all time. Like, it's been there for a reason. We've shifted now. People use emails and spreadsheets and PDFs. I guess at first it was stone tablets and messenger boys and carrier pigeons, right? But the whole thing was the same.
I mean, you could go back to Mesopotamia where they were doing ledgers on clay tablets.
Exactly. So as far as I know, one day I'll write the history of how invoicing has been done. Technologies have changed. You've still had the same process, which is to say you've got this human that sits here and looks at every single customer and tries to figure out what to do with them. As you said, this is a communication and negotiation problem rather than a payments problem. So we went away and we built the agent to act like the human did. That's before you account for the madness of what actually happens when humans start responding to it.
You had mentioned to me that there was one customer email that made you question more specifically your beta testing assumptions and forced you to redesign your approach to handling this real world invoice chaos as you're describing. Walk me through what that was like and what was going on in the team's mind when all this happened.
the very first reply we ever received appropriately enough. I think I'd even asked some of our advisors, how often is it that people respond in more complex ways? And, it's relatively common, but you're probably okay. You can start with a simplistic set. We'd assumed that there would be one reaction per email. The first email comes in, and about 3 of us are sort of huddled around on Zoom looking at this email. It takes us about 5 to 10 minutes between us to understand what the email said. It was along the lines of, in response to your email from Lunos, the AI, in response to your email about my 4 invoices, invoice number 1, I sent the check, you haven't cashed it. In response to invoice number 2, I don't think that balance is right. It then referenced invoice number 5, which didn't exist, and said something else about invoice number 3 and 4. All the references were slightly mismatched. It was just one of those moments, especially for the engineers involved, where they suddenly deeply realized the problem because they spent 10 minutes trying to read a single email and interpret it. At that point, we obviously had to think a bit differently. We chose to make the product much more agentic than we'd previously thought, because this just doesn't work to have such sort of trying to be so defined about it. You actually have to embrace the chaos. If you don't embrace the chaos, you're not going to be able to handle it. So now Lunos, the AI, is a chaos embracing agent.
How do you structure the AI to actually make decisions about escalation? When does it route to customer success manager versus an AP manager versus a CFO? And how does it learn those patterns?
The way I think about this problem is that there is quite a defined list of things that could happen. It's just that the combinations and permutations kill you. There might only be, in theory, 20, 25 different elements of a response that someone could give to an email, and 3 ways you might respond to each of them. But they can happen in any combination across any series of emails. And the reason this is completely unsolvable without AI, and why for thousands of years people have done it the same way, is because there's literally billions of combinations of what could happen in this. You just can't encode it in any way. So the way we've approached it really is to blend the building blocks that you can to bring the reliability and standardization to each piece with the agentic approach to be able to handle every which way they come at you. It's a combination of how you can bring reliability and structured data that is very domain specific, and then combine that with the latest models that allow you to have an agent to go about it. So I think it's always that combination of the structure you bring and the uncertainty and agentic nature that you combine with it. We're always seeking the right balance so that it can cope with. In a heartbeat, we had one the other day where we found out it was natively multilingual. Someone responded in German. The customer that was telling me about this said, I was a bit worried for a minute. I had this email in German. There's a little wizard that you can see for replies when you've not let it do it automatically. They clicked through and they're like, it's converted it. They're making a payment promise, I think it was. And then the reply, it had written it half in German for the customer and half in English underneath for him, so that it actually had the email in both languages. And we had no idea it could do this, to be honest. It's sort of an immersion effect of the agent.
You gotta love undocumented features like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that combination of the structure you bring and the chaos that you embrace to handle the way the humans really act.
I think it's interesting. The way you're describing this reminds me of when I had a conversation with Dave Glazer, the CEO of Dwolla. And he was talking about how they leverage AI in their organization. They have this theory of above the line and below the line. You do as much above the line with AI and machine learning. And when you can't automate it, when it requires human intervention, that's when you start to bring that in. It sounds like that's kind of the way that you've approached this, especially going from an email first architecture. Why was email the first place you wanted to start?
Email is the base layer that allows everything else. If you start saying to people, you're going to have to log in this way or enter the information in that way, then you can no longer be the network of agents that can power B2B commerce. You're never going to persuade everyone to do any of these things. It is, in fact, customers and the prospects are annoyed at the people on the AP side that are creating all of these barriers. So for me, email embraces the human nature of the problem and allows you to fallback whenever there's nothing else. You don't actually need an API. You can just email them. And the API becomes a nice to have for a more efficient way of communicating. Email is the bedrock of the world's APAR system. And we want it to be natively built on that with everything else an extension, rather than saying like, this only works in certain ways. Otherwise, you're straight back at me with my hammer saying the answer is that you log into a portal. No, this is the humans are right. We're just trying to make a scalable and optimizable version of these humans.
I've personally seen teams manually tracking payment promises and Slack channels, right? Reconciliation processes that are taking weeks instead of hours. ACH rejects that trigger a whole cascading level of manual workflows where the chief operations officers or the chief financial officer have to immediately jump into a Slack channel as soon as there's a customer response. And then they can figure out how to fix the automated dunning sequence and work through that. I personally have built workflows with AWS, N8N, Make.com, and other custom solutions too. But the moment a human responds to an automated email, it seems like everything breaks and becomes manual again. One of the things you guys are focused on is making the AR departments more efficient with AI while actually improving their results. So I want to have specific numbers, some specific measurable like workforce transformation, cash flow acceleration numbers that customers are reporting with real ROI data.
Think of monitor, suggest, and act as the three modes of Lunos that you can use for each individual customer. So monitor, you just leave everything as you are, but there's no AI, but you see a single pane of glass. Suggest makes it Lunos' problem, not your problem, but you still have to approve everything. And act is where the real magic is, like you've handed it off to a junior worker and off it goes, and it'll come back to you when it needs things, but it's off. So one of the customers, we're ready to shift to act mode. Within the first 2 days, a quarter of the entire AR balance had been paid because no one ever gets it. Even on suggest mode, no one actually really ever gets to all of these. They end up with all these actions, and then they unleashed it. Suddenly, here you go. I think it was nearly $1 million that came in within a couple of days. So, the power of the scale that you can do is really quite significant. When everyone I ever meet is doing this with a spreadsheet, there's only so many emails you can send and store in your spreadsheet. Whereas when you know that it's all going to be recorded for you, all the invoice issues are going to come back and you're not going to have to record them, you can have that confidence to actually act more. The effects can be pretty dramatic.
Support provided by Skyflow. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? What if you could ensure data privacy, governance, and compliance with just a few API calls? What if you could worry less about PCI requirements while actually improving privacy and security? How much more time would your team have to truly innovate? How much faster could you build and ship new features? How much more powerful could your app be? Skyflow is a zero-trust data privacy vault delivered as an API. Skyflow's radically simple design lets you collect, secure, and tokenize personal information like card data and payment details. And with built-in features like encrypted data analysis and sharing, anonymization, and advanced governance, your days of choosing between data security and data usability are over. Whether you're just concerned with PCI compliance or need to go further to include CCPA, GDPR, SOC 2, and beyond, Skyflow has you covered. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? With Skyflow, you can. Visit skyflowsecure.com today to learn how. You're talking about those three stages and the act side of the house. I had to go back to my ACH reject nightmares. Walk me through how Lunos handles this type of reject nightmare from becoming just a notification, but more of a resolution.
The first step is we are pro reply, not no reply. We really embrace and encourage people to come back with these questions, because if they just sit there and ignore your emails and ignore your text, you don't really help. When they come, what's really happening is interpreting the message, figuring out what records need updating, drafting the reply, and then changing everything else in response. If someone comes in with a dispute for the first time, it should be identifying that this is a dispute. It should be identifying which invoices this is in question. Was it all of them? The core problem, this is why actually kind of in some regards, one of the magical stages is keeping the records up to date. Essentially, everyone we meet has some kind of spreadsheet that they download from their ERP once a week, or probably less half the time. They're trying to sort of mark which ones are done. and they're trying to keep track of what's reconciled and what's not and all this. But when your records go wrong, the simple version of your story is avoided because the records aren't wrong in the first place. So you don't even deal with the question. And then
if I would have downloaded their files, it probably would have made it a little bit easier on myself. But yeah, I'm human. I make mistakes.
We all are. We all make mistakes. That's the classic aftermath that we see all the time. It's exactly that combination of like how good were the records in the first place? Did you keep them up to date? And then how quickly and reliably can you respond to what's happening? We would have marked the invoice as done with an issue. We would start investigating it. It would prevent any further action against the person. In the meantime, Lunos would be bugging you about the fact that you haven't resolved this yet. The key part really about your example, and the thing that I find so interesting about it is how the two fit together. That if either one of these things go wrong, whether it's your responses or whether it's the record keeping you had in the first place, they're only as good as the worst of the two of them, right?
I want to come back to the KPI side. You mentioned that they were able to get 25% of their AR came in within a couple of days. I'm wondering how much of this communication flow that you've put together, does it help your clients with more accurate payment timing predictions than a traditional ML model?
In my days at GoCardless, we built various models about payment timing predictions. You're sort of looking with a lot of payments, but not much depth. And you start investigating whether the lunar cycle matters, and like because some people are paid on a lunar cycle, so you start exploring these variables. Whereas our belief is that actually the depth of information is what allows you to predict this, because if you know that that customer has traditionally over the last 12 months paid on average 13 days late, and you also have a signal over here or whatever that there's a contract renegotiation going on, or that their credit rating has fallen or something, that's much richer information than trying to have an ML model that is just predicted based on other people's behavior. If you've got their email saying, I will pay you next Friday, you can make quite good prediction about when the payment's going to be made because you've got their email that says you're going to be paid next Friday. The real revolution that we're looking to make in the cash flow forecasting side is, number one, actually base these predictions on the relationship rather than basing them on data about other people. And number two, kind of a revolution towards bottom-up rather than top-down forecasting that allows you to manage to a range rather than just having to suffer from it. We want to get to the point where we can start taking action. We could immediately, because it's an AI rather than a human workforce, we can sweat some of those people a bit harder in order to make sure that you get paid, to reduce the fact that cash flow is the number one cause of businesses failing, even businesses where the customers want them to survive. We'd love to get to that point where we can actually be doing something about that problem.
It's crazy how all that fits together, and trying to figure out how do you get the data also back into your ERP or your accounting software. This is one of the places where most FinTech solutions die a horrible death. I've got one business running that uses completely custom AWS infrastructure. We built internal ledgering technology from scratch. There's another group that uses Bill.com as their AR/AP. Then we've got some folks who are using legacy QuickBooks desktop installations that they're not even using the web version. And then when you look at all these different tools, almost everything is tied together with custom APIs or robotic process automation. Most of it's super niche, so the off-the-shelf solutions don't work without massive levels of customization. When I have AR platforms tell me they can replace my entire financial infrastructure, I question it, because what it tends to happen is it forces my teams and my customers into yet another portal where they have to create another account, remember some more passwords, and honestly, that just becomes a deal killer straight out of it. You've approached this completely different. You're positioning Lunos as that invisible orchestration layer that works with all the chaos we already have. Can you explain how you integrate with this messy reality of solutions that are out in the marketplace, and how it's not just another integration headache that breaks every 6 months?
We think about ourselves a little bit differently to in most platforms. The timeless problem of businesses paying each other involves everyone adopting a common standard. That's never going to be the case. We think of it in two ways, one of which is how we can get all the data that we need, which really is the same as a human, right? If you're trying to imagine how Lunos works, think about how the human would do, and then imagine how you could make that work and make it superhuman. So if the human needs to read the CRM to figure out whether that deal's being renegotiated, to get the contract in order to check whether the query's right, well, that means that we need to be able to read the CRM too, right? We think of it as how can we interconnect to get the data. Email is ultimately the web that can fit all of these things together. Lunos can actually, as a worker, can do what the human would do and say, well, sorry, hey, CSM, actually what is going on with this? I think the ability to act as a human is the first defense against all this. People have coped with all of these systems for all this time. And if they can't get the information they need, they find a way around it. The second is that we're not trying to think everyone is going to adopt Lunos directly and switch over so they have their login details to the Lunos portal. My belief is this is going to become agent to agent, and we want to be the agents. We want to be the people providing the agents to everyone else. It's kind of the world's biggest niche, I suppose. I sometimes think of it as we want to be the provider of the agent for the world's biggest niche.
A lot of times these integrations have to happen in order to streamline the workflow, to be able to see the data that you were talking about. How have you at Lunos moved forward with figuring out what systems to integrate with so that people don't have to rebuild or reinstall an entire stack?
It is ultimately incredibly strategic for us to be able to integrate with as many things as possible while still getting the data into Lunos for it to be effective. So we've invested a lot in the tooling required to do that.
What kinds of systems has Lunos already integrated to alert me that I have two different things, one in my CRM and one in my ERP?
The base data for us is the ERP, NetSuite, QuickBooks, Xero, Stripe invoicing, and we're rolling out many more as we go. We are pushing HubSpot and Salesforce as the obviously dominant CRMs of choice. And email and Slack are the really big comms ones. Slack is actually the one I'm personally most excited about because as an entrepreneur and founder myself, I just don't want to be logging into all these systems. When we use Lunos on ourselves, which for our customers, they will obviously also have their invoices and their billing handled by Lunos, I will just be asking Slack, hey, what's going on with FinTech Confidential? Have they paid us yet? And I will be expecting Lunos.
And the answer is no. No, we have not, Duncan.
Ted has not paid that invoice yet.
Those integrations are fantastic. What is Lunos' strategy around APIs and allowing agents and other bespoke systems to connect into the system that you've built?
I think the future is agent to agent, but there is still going to be a bit of work to get there. I think one aspect of this that I've experienced the hard way at GoCardless is if you're never being the person that directly owns the customer relationship, you can't actually build the best version of it yourself in the first place. We're starting with working directly with merchants because, frankly, most of our best ideas come from working with them. I think through that journey, it's about getting the relationship with the humans right for an agent number one first, before we start adding in the rest of the agents, and getting all of the interactions with the other systems. We need to make sure everything's working reliably on both sides before connecting those two together and entering that fully automated agent-to-agent flow. Our strategy is to start on the AR side with the AR agent and make that work as well as possible with humans and with systems. Then from there, start working across AR and AP to make the agent-to-agent vision a reality.
Duncan, you've recently launched publicly into a market that has fundamentally been manual since commerce began thousands of years ago, using clay tablets. As someone who's built FinTech companies for over 25 years, I've witnessed multiple technology revolutions shape entire industries. And I can tell you that what we're talking about right now sounds a lot like science fiction. But it's possible that we end up in a fully autonomous AI negotiation in the next 3 to 5 years. So what I want you to do, this is my favorite part of the episode. What I want you to do is I want you to look deep into my crystal ball, look deep into it. And I want you to go look into like 2028, to 2030. How do you see AI's negotiating and reshaping this $70 trillion B2B landscape? And what does it look like to you?
I think that once it starts, it's actually going to be surprisingly quick in some parts of the economy. Stage 1 is single agent to single agent. And stage 2 is the network of agents. And the real magic for the economy and for us as individuals rather than founders of companies in the space is the network side. Let's start with the agent to agent. Two companies do business. There have been people and agents involved on all sides discussing that. When it comes to settling it, this is a question of communicating, agreeing on data, and a question of what is ultimately actually a negotiation about the terms and how those terms merge into a reality. I imagine a world where actually within possibly seconds, if the humans have set up all the data, or possibly days, if the agents are still chasing the humans about this, the two sides will come together and have agreed, you know what? Okay, this data is all correct. We have resolved whether as per your story, we have resolved whether this is the correct record of all of this. This would have been solved in an instant by both sides comparing their records. And then ultimately sitting there, and this is where the real negotiation part comes. The real power comes from the fact that this is a network. If company A owes company B and company B owes company C, we have started creating chains and networks of how these things fit together. And ultimately, the part I'm most excited about, I've had friends whose businesses failed because of cash flow, and their customers didn't want them to fail, and their customers wanted them to continue, and they loved their products, but it didn't work. Once you have a network of agents, you can negotiate and say, there's a company over here elsewhere in the supply chain that is perfectly willing to pay now in exchange for a 2% discount. And there's a company 4 steps down the chain that is actually really struggling. The whole thing can just hyper efficiently manage that negotiation in a way that is completely impossible. If it's all humans and everyone's responding to their emails, there's no way that's going to happen. But if this can ripple through the chain, then suddenly we end up with something that will really benefit all of us because, great products, great businesses, great people will be in a better position to thrive because this gunk that is in the way and all of these emails and these slow interactions won't be there anymore. So it's the network of agents that gets me really excited.
Being a FinTech founder, and we have a large audience of FinTech founders and executives. If you were to give them one piece of advice, and it's the only advice that they could ever use going forward, what would it be?
Focus on solving the customer's problem as best as you can and let everything else take care of itself.
What does that mean?
It's really easy as an executive, as a founder, to get caught up in the business and the metrics, and these things are important. Look, I'm a data-driven person. I think these things are important, but I think the experience of my, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that was part of leading me to found Lunos, was a reminder for me that it's very easy to get caught up in that to the detriment of seeing the bigger and smaller picture at the same time. So as a product guy, as a chief product officer, I thought I was living by this: focus on customer problems, solutions come second. I think it's not just a reminder for executives and founders everywhere that it's really easy to lose sight of that. And it's one of the things that sort of obsessive customer problem focus is something I want to do my best to live up to at Lunos. If you live up to that, it's quite hard for things to go too far off.
Great advice. Something that we all need to be reminded about. This has been like a conversation, more of a masterclass really in strategic thinking and technology vision. We've covered your journey from cardless to attacking this $70 trillion B2B payments market. Not only that, we've also talked about how Lunos is revolutionizing the way we look at accounts receivable by treating it as a communication and negotiation challenge, rather than just this workflow problem. Looking at it from the perspective of what would a human do? You're building this seamless integration without forcing people into major infrastructure changes or yet logging into another portal, which is always my favorite thing to do. If you haven't already, go ahead and head over to lunos.ai and check it out. It could help you get paid quicker. So thanks again for joining us, Duncan.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
That does it for this episode of FinTech Confidential's Leaders One-on-One series. And if these conversations, they're really designed to give you more than just a service level soundbite. They're here to show you how real operators think, lead, and make things happen in FinTech. If you got value from today's episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another one. You can find us at YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. If you want to go deeper into what we're tracking behind the scenes, sign up at fintechconfidential.com and share this with someone who's serious about where FinTech is going. And as always, keep moving forward. As we wrap up today's episode, I've got one last thing for you. If you're in the trenches fighting fraud and financial crime, you know it's a complex battlefield. That's where Hawk's AI tools for real-time payment screening, AML, transaction monitoring, and dynamic customer risk rating come into play. These aren't just buzzwords. They're game changers designed to make your compliance more effective and less of a headache. Imagine slashing through false positives with precision and giving your compliance strategy the edge it needs. Head on over to gethawkai.com to sign up for a demo and discover how their platform can revolutionize how you fight fraud and financial crime.
This has been a production of DD3 Media with all rights reserved. This is provided for informational purposes only. It is not offered or intended to be used as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. We strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, but will not be responsible for any missing facts or inaccurate information. You comply and understand that you should use any of this information at your own risk. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile financial assets, so research and make your own financial decisions.